When I think of how what we're doing will impact this world the most, it has to be this arena.
At the center of most autoimmune diseases, people look at autoimmune diseases like they're completely different issues. Part of what drives an autoimmune disease is the aggravated immune system. Why is the immune system getting aggravated?
With all of this money that he's investing trying to slow his biological aging, he talks about his diet a lot. Every calorie has to fight for its life.
Processed food, everybody agrees, is bad for you, and we need to reduce it. But how much do we reduce it? Did it come from processed sources, or is it unprocessed? I just gave you the rule book. 3 rules.
So I was talking to a colleague the other day, and he reminded me of a story. Basically, we're in San Francisco with a mentor at a huge meeting, and I won't take you through the whole thing, but the essence of what he told us was, when you look at any orator, any visionary, any leader that you truly respect, they do an incredible job at painting a picture of what it is that they see for the future.
Yeah.
Whether it's Lincoln's Gettysburg Address or MLK's I Have a Dream, they know what they see in the future. So for you and for your audience, what is that vision that you have with all of this work that you're putting into the FLOA Protocol?
Yeah, I think there's 2 pieces of that. There's what I would love to see in the scientific community in terms of the adopting of longer fasting protocols as an actual clinical treatment. I'm not saying to eliminate medications, but something that can be used alongside, basically just used some amount, right? I mean, it's just not used at all or even considered. So we're so quick to just medicate and not actually consider lifestyle. So that I call it a pipe dream because, I wouldn't bet $1 that that's actually going to happen, but I would love for that to happen. And I hope everything that I'm doing can contribute to that, because we are doing aggressive levels of fasting with patients. And so we have data, and I would love that to be the starting point, the cornerstone, the motivation to maybe encourage researchers to take a look at that and say, wow, there's something here. Let's study this further. So I would love to see that. Now, as far as what we're doing individually, despite what the consensus may be and my ability to motivate the whole, my long-term goal right now is the FLOA Lifestyle Group. The FLOA Lifestyle Group is the group of my post-weight loss patients, right? You know as well as I do, the literature is very clear that maintaining weight loss is damn near impossible, right? We call them unicorns, right? 1 out of 5 people over a couple of years are going to maintain a loss beyond 20 pounds, say, give or take. So this group to me is so exciting because I have a high level of confidence that we are actually going to get beyond that 20% mark severely. And I think it's going to be flipped more in that 80, 85. So imagine this group where everybody has gotten to their weight loss goals via the FLOA Protocol, right? Aggressively long fasting and everything else. But now the focus is on maintaining. Well, I believe the maintenance part of it is going to be significantly easier to obtain and maintain because of the aggressive changes we did with our physiology, with the fasting that caused the insulin resistance, the metabolic flexibility improvements, the reduction in inflammation. But then we have that continual support, that continual motivation, because even with my approach, there are still going to be people that are going to rebound. There are still going to be people that are going to get stressful times in their lives and they fall off the bandwagon. But what I believe is the FLOA Protocol and the FLOA Lifestyle make it so much easier for us to be able to get that person back on track. Whether they do it on their own, which I think a lot of these people will be able to with the information we're providing them, but the people that will need my additional support will have that community and affordable basis to where I can, for example, this is one thing that I'm thinking will be pretty cool, depending on how big we get, but that 15, 10% of people, I can do my weekly Zooms, or maybe the Zooms will just be having a Zoom of 10, 20, 30 people, and the rest of the people are watching and watching me help a person get back on track, identify what was wrong, was it likely it's going to be stress, right? And just encouraging them and motivating them to get back on track and realigning them with the tools that they have that they probably just forgot that they can just do. And so to me, that's like beyond exciting because that format is going to be both affordable and effective for something that I'm pretty positive is not happening at all. So that's the future. I'm super excited for that.
And I guess that's what you call it lifestyle. This is an ongoing thing. It's not something that you jump into and you just forget about forever.
100%.
And I'm glad we left off there because let's go beyond the number, beyond the scale. I mean, everybody wants to lose weight, or at least about 90% of Americans want to lose weight. But what is past that? What health markers, what positive changes, what life improvements have you seen beyond the number on the scale as people go through this?
Oh my gosh, the list is long for sure. But beyond achieving the desired weight, and then the ability to maintain that weight long term, we have some pretty massive improvements in health. So remember, I was doing aggressive fasting with patients before the FLOA protocol. And really at that point, my focus wasn't purely weight loss like it is now, and it was functional health. And so with functional health, I had patients coming to me with autoimmune diseases, with various inflammatory conditions. Common ones are PCOS, menopausal women, hormonal issues, and just the biggest, most common symptoms were feeling like energy shot. There's no energy. And so got issues, couple got related issues. So what I did as pretty in line with those functional doctors is we take an approach towards changing their lifestyle, getting them on a better nutritional protocol, and getting them on a supplement protocol. So lifestyle changes at the end of the day. That's what functional medicine is all about. And so, but I incorporated so much fasting, and I am convinced that the fasting was the reason why I had patients, because I would go to these functional conferences and working with other doctors and just speaking about outcomes and the amount of effort it would take. And I don't know why, but I always, at the time, I was guessing it was the fasting. And now I'm convinced that the aggressive amounts of fasting I would do with patients, despite weight loss goals, to me, yielded better results because many reasons, but prolonged fasting has its ability to resensitize the cells to insulin, to reduce inflammation, to improve metabolic health, to create stressors that challenge the body to respond, activating longevity genes. We know it's anti-cancerous, cellular autophagy,
Okay, let me pause you, okay? Because I do have questions about this, and this is really good. Autophagy, I'm gonna shelf that, okay, for a little bit later. I'm working this in the moment, so let me think for a second. I'm gonna break this down for you. The blood sugar and insulin, let's call that metabolic. I want to save that for last.
Okay.
I want to address what you see in lipid changes over time as well with weight loss. But you mentioned inflammation, so let's start with autoimmune, PCOS, GERD, SIBO, and any inflammatory condition. What changes do you see there?
The conditions get better, So at the center of most autoimmune diseases, and it's so interesting because people look at autoimmune diseases like they're completely different issues. And I would say to a certain extent, they are different in terms of different possible genetic contributions to these diseases. But at the center of all autoimmune diseases, you have an overactive immune system, which is targeting various tissues for destruction. And what we find in the functional world is almost always some sort of inflammatory gut issue, whether it's full-blown celiac disease, leaky gut, they have IBS-like symptoms, maybe they don't, but there's an inflammation and distress going on in the gut. So, and just so you know, this systemic inflammation, one of the biggest drivers behind systemic inflammation is from the gut.
There's GI distress.
Yep. So if we can heal the gut, we're going to make massive improvements to the overall inflammation. But part of what drives an autoimmune disease is the aggravated immune system. Why is the immune system getting aggravated? And one of the theories right now that to me I believe is true because that's what I kind of operate off of in terms of helping patients, and I've seen them get better time and time again. But it's the leaky gut idea. Whether it's progressed to the point where we call it officially leaky gut, which to this day some medical practitioners still don't even acknowledge that leaky gut is a thing, but many do. So at the center, like understanding leaky gut, we have these like I always like to do this to kind of demonstrate these tiny gap junctions, right? So if we imagine our digestive system, this hose or tube, and within that tube you have the walls, and those walls have the tight gap junctions where food ends up breaking down. There's digestive enzymes that get released, and it gets broken down to the smallest part, not its smallest part, but small enough to be able to pass through those gap junctions, and then it gets into the bloodstream, and then it's assimilated, right? We can utilize the micronutrients and the macronutrients. Well, leaky gut is a condition where there's inflammatory destruction or inflammatory issues going on. And so now those tiny gap junctions, they start to get a little bigger, right? And as they get bigger, larger than what should be passing through food particles end up making its way through. And the immune system, right, which is supposed to do what it does, ends up targeting those larger food particles for destruction, which in of itself is an inflammatory reaction. Mm-hmm. So the immune system thinks it's doing what it's supposed to be doing because it's not supposed to see those large food particles passing through. And that destruction of those larger food particles is itself more inflammatory, which is more destructive to those tight gap junctions, and it perpetuates itself and drives it, right? So we have to look at leaky gut as that base of autoimmune diseases. And fasting has plenty of literature, especially longer rounds of fasting, and some people call it a gut reset or a gut check. But providing the nutrients to the gut and fasting can be an essential piece of healing the gut, which is then going to help the recovery from autoimmune diseases. Whether you reverse an autoimmune disease, whether it goes in dormant, or whether it just kind of goes on the side and not the big risk. I think that's different person by person, right? I'm not sitting here saying we're reversing autoimmune diseases, although I feel like for many patients we have, but it becomes to a point where it's much less of an issue, which contributes to the overall health.
Right. And one is just finding the autoimmune too. What happens if you don't know you have it, right? And you haven't had the actual panel of tests done to figure that out and get down to the bottom of the root cause.
Yeah. Well, and what's even crazy with that, is the fact that a lot of autoimmune diseases they go undiagnosed, right? So remember, in the healthcare system, we only recognize and call something a disease. I'm just going to say this outright: when there's a drug treatment or when there's a surgery.
That's just the state.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? But that we have a solution for it. But it sucks for the people that have something. And let me take a step back.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you really quick. Would an example of that be metabolic syndrome, right? You don't have prediabetes, right? We're not going to give you insulin. You're not going to get metformin. You're not going to get medicated. But here you are on this path towards diabetes, and yet we're doing nothing about it because there's no quote-unquote clinical diagnosis.
Yeah, there's no drug yet. There's no drug yet, and I'm just going to go outright and say it. So there's no drug yet. They call it a syndrome. They don't like calling it a disease until they have a treatment for it, and they're not going to put the millions of. And I understand that, because to come up with a drug, to come up with a solution, quote unquote solution, there has to be enough business. There has to be enough people reporting these symptoms to where they say, hey, there's a problem here. Let's put the money and time into the research so that we can find a drug, and then we can call it a disease. So until that point, millions of people end up suffering with things that go undiagnosed all the time. And this is the classic scenario. My doctor says everything's fine, yet I feel like shit. Just bottom line. And in many of those cases, it requires a thorough functional doctor. Mm-hmm. And functional could be a naturopath, could be a chiropractor, could be an acupuncturist. There's so many different licensed professionals that I'm referring to when I say functional, because to me, it doesn't really matter the degree they have. It matters their ability to understand that this is more of a issue with what's gone wrong with the body, so that these various outpoints, these various issues manifest. And one big category is autoimmune disease. So let's heal the body. Let's remove the interference, because the body's always trying to get back to the best state that it possibly can. And so that's kind of how we look at the big picture there.
Okay. Category 2, lipid. Statins are being prescribed like no other right now. I know there's a lot of conversation about how important is total cholesterol. Thank God now we have at least HDL ratio. We can actually tell someone, hey, your likelihood of heart attack or heart event goes up when this number goes up, and LDL gets broken down into other functions. But in general, when you're looking at someone, which the majority of Americans do have lipid issues. What changes do you see there?
We see improvement. We see in some cases total cholesterol going down, although sometimes not. Maybe sometimes even a little bit of a raise in total cholesterol because we do lower carbohydrate intakes. We're not going full blown keto. We can talk about that later, but we do tend to do a lower carb approach, and so cholesterol could lower. It could stay the same. It could go up a little bit, but as you mentioned, the ratio of that HDL to LDL improves. Now, cholesterol is an interesting topic. Cholesterol, I would say, out of all the markers, is the one that I feel personally the least informed about. There is, I just saw some really good data. In fact, Peter Attia was talking about this, that there is even was it Peter Attia and a couple other docs were talking about the undeniable correlation between LDL, which is the old school approach, just looking at LDL, and overall cardiovascular disease and eventually fatality. So we're talking randomized human control studies. So the data, as much as we started to kind of look at, say, total cholesterol doesn't matter, LDL doesn't matter, it's all about that ratio. I still think that's very true, but we can't deny the human randomized control studies and looking at LDL. So my point is that I do operate when it comes to cholesterol a little bit more conservatively with my medical practitioners. If someone's LDL does get high, I think it's a conversation to have, considering where we're at with the data, and consider what's the best course of action. Because again, with those RCTs out there, knowing that LDL is strongly correlated, regardless of HDL, connected to heart disease, it's at least something we need to consider.
Okay.
Quick minute here. I wanted to tell you guys about my free resources to help you guys with your sustainable weight loss goals. I have a free Facebook community where I do weekly live coaching. It's all about helping you hit your goals and maintain your weight for the rest of your life. And I also have a free PDF where I break down step by step exactly what it takes for you to be successful. I'll put a link to this in the show, and we'll see you guys back in the show.
Bigger one, somehow, insulin sensitivity and blood sugar regulation as a whole. And diabetes is currently about a quarter of our healthcare dollars are being spent on just diabetes alone.
It's crazy.
I mean, I grew up with bread at the foundation of my food pyramid. I remember the American Heart Association saying that coconut oil was terrible for you and that you should instead be consuming vegetable oil. There's all that. And yet diabetes hasn't gotten better. Blood sugar hasn't gotten better. A1C hasn't gotten better. And this is probably, when I think of how what we're doing will impact this world the most, it has to be this arena. I mean, outside of the general maintenance and just being healthy, which of course is a success on its own, just being able to reduce this ever-growing trend of diabetics, right? So what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I look at diabetes like a different flavor of obesity. Truthfully, at its core, a diabetic person has a lot of the same pre-existing issues that a person that has obesity does. At the end of the day, I'm not here saying insulin resistance is everything. We've plenty of conversations and content that I put out about that, the basis of obesity, and there's a lot more than just insulin resistance. And that's a fair conversation to have. But insulin resistance is a huge component behind obesity, and it's an even bigger component behind diabetes, because your body will become insulin resistant several years, 3 to 5 years usually, before the blood sugar actually begins to rise, before a person becomes diabetic. When a person gets that diagnosis of prediabetes, their body finally started to lose the battle. But for the last 3 to 5 years, and we're going to talk about what that problem is, that the elevated blood sugar, the elevated insulin levels, their body started to lose that battle. But for about 3 to 5 years, their body was winning the battle, if we're really defining the battle as just the blood sugar, right? But then eventually its own internal systems that keeping that blood sugar down starts to fail. And that's why blood sugar gets past A1C 5.7, which is the diagnosis of prediabetes. But if we take a step back and go, okay, well, what do we mean by battle, right? What is this battle your body's having for 35 years, which you can measure, unfortunately, is not part of a standard health panel, which is why nobody ever, very rarely has this discussion, especially if where most people are in a situation where they're utilizing their insurance and all they can get is a panel that their insurance covers, which is unfortunate. We're not looking at insulin, but insulin, fasted insulin and C-peptide would be the markers to check. And it has to be fasted. So fasted panel in the morning. Anybody watching this, you can ask your doctor for it, even if you have to pay $20, $50 for it, $100 for it. Very, very powerful and important test to have. You should have, depending on the lab corp and your reference range, on the lower side, the insulin levels and C-peptide should be on the lower side. But if that thing is starting to raise, that number, both of those, closer to the upper quadrant of that reference range or beyond, why would you have elevated insulin levels if you are fasted? Because remember, insulin is only supposed to be released a couple hours. It's only supposed to be elevated for a couple hours after you eat food, which spikes the blood sugar. Then insulin levels should be going down. But if you're checking fasted levels and they're still elevated, what is going on? Mm-hmm. Now, of course, there are situations, there are things and explanations, but for the most common scenario that's taking place, it's elevated due to that resistance. That resistance that's developed, and that's a whole other conversation. If we want to get into, we can. What led to insulin resistance? But the insulin resistance is there and can be confirmed with an elevated fasted insulin and C-peptide panel. So bringing it back to what we do with the FLOA protocol, the FLOA protocol is so aggressive at beating obesity because it's that resistance that led to the excessive deposition of body fat. It's also what leads to the development of diabetes. So literally, if I have a diabetic in front of me that says, "Doc, help me reverse my diabetes," it wouldn't be much different than helping an obese person beat their obesity. Literally, I'd probably say the only difference is some more caution or some more concern as that person implements the fasting protocols. Because we think about it, a diabetic so we have a pre-diabetic, no medication, pre-diabetic, maybe some medication, diabetic, one medication, couple medications, and then the medications increase. And then you get to an insulin-dependent diabetic, and then you get more and more insulin. So once you start getting to that, like 1 or 2, 3 medication, I would say not one, but maybe once you start getting to that 2 or 3 diabetic medications, and then you start getting to the point where you need insulin, now your diabetes has really progressed. Now you're on some hardcore meds, or the most hardcore blood sugar lowering agent is insulin. Right, injecting insulin. And I know those, for any diabetics watching this, that tiny little bit in your syringe is actually a tsunami. It's a lot compared to the amount that your body would internally have to release otherwise. So when you've gotten to that point, fasting does become, I want to choose my words wisely here. I'll say dangerous because I want to be conservative. Fasting can be dangerous if you're on aggressive amount of blood sugar lowering agents, because those agents, medications and insulin, are prescribed by a healthcare professional, assuming you're following a normal eating pattern, which is double meals throughout the day. So if all of a sudden now you stop eating, the amount of blood sugar lowering agents they give you can have and may have a much stronger effect, and the concern would be pushing your blood sugar too low, a medical condition known as hypoglycemia, which is a big deal. That you can end up in the hospital or coma or even worse. So if you are in that category, you do have to pay extra attention. I'm not giving any medical advice to anybody watching this. You should always consult with your healthcare professional before starting any sort of fasting regimen, specifically if you're diabetic. Now, if we start moving down the spectrum, maybe we're just on metformin. That's usually almost always the first medication they give diabetics. Or even if we're not on medications and we're a diabetic, I'd say it's still talk to your primary care physician, but now the concern over hypoglycemia starts to drop. And then if we're not diabetic at all and we're just, not to say just obese like it's not a problem, but if we're not diabetic and we're obese, I'm not concerned about that. Let's get on a fasting regimen and let's get your body going. Because I always coach my patients as a precaution. This is what medical grade hypoglycemia looks like. Here's the chart. Look at it, study it. in any of your fasting windows, if you guys ever experience any of these symptoms, the ones that are medical hypoglycemia, you text us, you let us know, because we have a really in-depth coaching program, and then we mark their chart. We make them get a blood glucose monitor, and now every time that person fasts, regardless of whether they're diabetic or not, we're monitoring their blood sugar and helping them sort of learn, because everyone's different, what low ranges for them are concerning. But if they're just experiencing the symptoms that I say that are acceptable, tiredness, brain fog, those sort of symptoms are expected when you are challenging your body. The challenge in this scenario being not eating and asking your body to utilize its fat stores to supply the brain, among everything else, which is the biggest glucose consumer in the body, about 25%, which is kind of crazy. You think about the weight of the brain and the weight of the body. The brain consumes about 25% of your glucose. So this is why you get cranky and foggy, and because your brain almost freaks out. But anyways, I don't want to go too far down that, but that I would say, bring it all together, I feel very confident that we can do a lot for diabetics, insulin-resistant patients, as much as we can for obesity. But we do tend to attract more obese patients, I would say.
Right. And I can see why it's just such a vicious cycle, man. Diabetes. Your body is resisting insulin. So your body requires more of it so you can actually get this blood sugar into the cell. But that action inherently is perpetuating the problem altogether, right? It's so crazy how it works. So conversely, someone's on your protocol. What's happening 12 hours into that first fast? What's happening after the completion of a 24-hour fast? What's happening that second time they jump into it, and why does it get easier at that point? And why is that not only helping to burn fat, but help to make somebody more insulin sensitive?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I'm speaking from clinical observation. I always try my best to cite what is backed up by data, strong data, light data, or my clinical observation. So we do have enough human physiology books to understand how the energy systems work. And so we do have a really good grasp of what happens when we fast. But I think what we're doing with the FLOA Protocol, 36-48 every single week, I look forward to the future in anticipation and excitement for that. But so let's start real quick, recap your energy systems. So human bodies have glucose metabolizing systems, and we have fat oxidizing systems. Sugar burning, fat burning, to make it simple, right? So sugar, or AKA carbohydrates, are stored in the liver and the muscle tissue, and we call that glycogen. So that is your primary source of fuel. So depending on how much muscle the person has and how active they are during the day, your average human has about 16 to 20 hours of energy in the form of glycogen, right? So a person that's right off the gate, your average person, is going to have poor metabolic flexibility, meaning their body is not really good and efficient at tapping into fat. And that makes sense because you think about the standard American diet. We're eating all the time. We're not going low carb. We're not fasting, right? So humans have lost their ability to be effective at fat burning. We're constantly giving our body more fuel, and so it's only utilizing the carb system. So when you start a fast, especially for the first time, you got to really think about that. You're asking your body to do something that it's just very ineffective at doing. And so, but I always tell people, look, again, non-diabetic, you are going to be fine. I can't tell you what the experience for you is going to be in terms of the difficulty level. I can say from thousands of patients that have never fasted, have never gone low carb, non-diabetics, non-medical conditions, right? The ranges of difficulty on 1 through 10 can be anything from 1 to 8. 8 to 9, right? So and it makes sense with the variance that we see person to person. So there's going to be a wide range of variability person to person in terms of the difficulty for them. But nonetheless, this is the thing that gets you better. So from a general sense, all we do is say, hey, push it as comfortably as you can, meaning experience the resistance from your body, the difficulty it's having. You know the difference between bad, low blood sugar, and normal symptoms that you would experience and push it within your comfort range.
Mhm.
That's like, I don't actually give them templates and say fastest for long, week number one. No, it doesn't make sense because there's too much variability.
Mhm.
We lay it out in stages for them, and we educate them on when to stop, when to not, what does it look like to progress, how to progress to the longer stages, but we arm them with, okay, great, this is your journey. The joke I always say to patients is like, you're driving the car. I'm just this metaphorical spirit that's sitting next to you, and I'm going to pull you out of a crash. If you crash, I'm going to get you back on track. If you make a wrong turn, I'm going to get you back, but it's you driving. You want to drive 20 miles per hour, or you want to drive 100 miles per hour, that's on the patient. But that's how we operate, because I choose to do it that way because they're going to end up making the better decision for themselves within their own comfort range.
Mhm.
So I know that's a little bit different than kind of what you were asking, but I did want to cover that. Going back to the body, it depletes glycogen stores, and now we're just forcing the body to get into fat mobilization. And the goal, because when your body is burning fat, it is producing ketone bodies. And when we are running off ketone bodies, we never run purely off ketone bodies, but when our ratio of carb to ketone increases, and the more ketone ratio, that's all those amazing benefits you hear about. The clean fuel, it's less oxidative damage to the body. You feel better, your energy's higher. It's a really awesome state to be able to be running off ketones, but it takes weeks or even months, sometimes even 6 to 9 months to get a person to that point, because each of them have their own individual starting points.
Okay.
I wanted to interrupt the show to tell you guys about the free resources that I have for you to be successful in 2024. The link in the show notes is going to provide you a way to join the free Facebook community. We do weekly live training. It's a great community. We'll answer all your questions with or without the medications. We're going to help you get there. And there's a free PDF which breaks down the steps so that you know exactly what to do, how to do it to be absolutely successful this year for your weight loss goals. Now back to the show.
Autophagy.
Okay.
This one, first of all, has been getting a ton of attention in media and mainstream. I feel like you hear about it everywhere. The best way I've ever heard it explained in a nutshell is your body performs a self-audit. All of your cells have organelles, just like we have organs. If those cells aren't performing at 100%, it cannibalizes them and replaces them with fully functioning cells. Now, what gets dicey is, one, what activates it, how long do you have to not eat, how much does working out affect it, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, how impactful is it on the human body?
Right.
I mean, I listen to a lot of Dr. Berg as an example, and he is convinced that, from different forms of neurodegeneration to multiple forms of cancer, basically almost everything he says you can heal yourself, right? And then there's guys who, of course, are much lower and think it doesn't exist at all, and everything in between. On a personal level, I took tons of supplements, made huge dietary changes, improved my lifestyle, but the dramatic changes that I saw in my labs never came to fruition until I got into prolonged fasting. They just didn't. And I know that's just me, but I've also seen it, I don't know, a couple hundred times with patients. At a certain point, you got to believe that there's some legitimacy.
Right.
So given all that, what do you have to say about it?
Yeah, I think your definition was great for cellular autophagy. I would add to that. So cellular autophagy is happening all the time, regardless of fasting, right? It is a cellular recycling process. And the trigger in terms of fasting, this is where people get a little bit and there's a lot of information out there, but it's that lack of protein, specifically consumption. So when your body notices a decrease in, we're not getting protein in, specifically amino acids, because amino acids are the building blocks of the body. So when there's less amino acids coming in, that's what really triggers maximal cellular autophagy. It's also a lack of calories coming in, but really lack of amino acids are the big trigger. So your body is always in a balance in terms of growth and breakdown. 24/7, there's always some breakdown happening, there's always some growth. But the growth requires amino acids to be shuttled in to develop the new organelles and repair cells and new cells generate. So in reaction to that lack of protein consumption, the body turns on that cellular autophagy mode. And as you said, breaks down the less functioning cells. It's also, and this is why I love the human body, because there's a universal intelligence within. It doesn't target your brain. It doesn't target your heart. It doesn't target. It knows the difference between essential and non-essential, which is just, again, I always like to highlight. There's a lot more intelligence in the body that, unfortunately, Western medicine gives credit. Side note, but it's important to note that. So first, it designates somehow. We have no clue how it does that. Again, universal intelligence, or innate intelligence. But then, yes, within the cells that it does want to break down and recycle, it is breaking down either the entire cell or organelles within the cell, which is interesting. A cell can have a couple organs apparently spliced out, and the cell still functioning somewhat. New organelle comes in, so it's either the organelles or the entire cell. Mm-hmm. But those broken down parts, those are literally broken down into individual amino acids, which can go back to some sort of bucket that the body then utilizes for the essential tissues. Because as we said, there's a constant state of protein breakdown happening 24/7. Mm-hmm. So that, in a nutshell, is what cellular autophagy is. And truthfully, from a scientific standpoint, we don't understand yet how cellular autophagy, like, we can't say from a literature standpoint, if you improve cellular autophagy, X will happen. Like, we don't know yet. What you're saying, though, what we're observing, what Dr. Berg is saying, what I've seen in myself and thousands of patients, it's undeniable. We just, this is why it's not being used in treatment modalities the way that I know it should be, because we just don't have the data to back that up yet. But you better believe, if my loved one was diagnosed with cancer, the first thing I'm going to do is get them on an aggressive fasting protocol. I'm going to lower carbohydrate intake, because it's less oxidative damage produced, because even when you eat food and you go through the entire process of converting into energy, there is free radical production, and we call that oxidative damage. So there's less oxidative damage when you're in a more of a low carb diet. Carbohydrate metabolism as a byproduct is more damaging. So again, I'm not saying carbs are hurting you guys out there, but it is less oxidative producing when we are on a low carb diet. So there's these things that we know to be true. And again, I'm excited for the future of the literature to back this up. But I do believe those things to be integral pieces. I think cellular autophagy is a must. And look, it's not even just the cellular autophagy. That's huge. But there's this other concept, and I want to talk about this really briefly because you made me think about it. David Sinclair talks about it a lot.
I was just thinking of him.
Yeah. Well,
my next question was going to involve him. I'm not joking.
That's hilarious. That is hilarious. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious if we're going to talk about the same piece of it, but he talks about the human body craves and needs stress. Our body is a stress handling mechanism. It copes and tolerates stress to then react and improve to whatever stressor is coming out of it. So in essence, we can say, at least again from a theory perspective, that not giving your body stress, not challenging it, causes regression in your health. And so that's where fasting comes into play for me, at least metabolic health-wise, that we need to be pushing the envelope. We need to be giving our body some amount of stress to cope with so that it can adapt and it can become more resilient. I love that word, resilience. Resilience is something that would be a way to describe why one body can handle pathogens and microorganisms that infest the body significantly better than another person, right? Because their immune system is more adept, it's more resilient. And so, again, these are great theories. They're backed by some literature, but I believe them to my core to be true.
Yeah. And I was thinking of NMN, right? That's why. And thinking about telomeres and lengthening lifespan. When you brought up diet, I thought of, do you know Brian Johnson?
Yes.
Right. He's spending, I think it's $4 million a year.
He's an interesting fellow.
He's like doping with his son's blood. But what I do believe in, the light that he gets, his supplement regimen, which is very, very specific, which made me think of the telomeres and NMN. And with all of this money that he's investing into trying to slow his biological aging, and almost reverse his natural age, he talks about his diet a lot.
Yeah.
And I remember the way he phrased it because I did like it. He says, I think he has 861 calories. It's somewhere around there. Every calorie has to fight for its life, right? He has his breakdowns. Most of his supplements, micronutrients, no calories there, but it's very, very specific, right? He doesn't want to be too much over. And with this protocol, diet's huge, and people are going to be most likely at a deficit. And of course, key nutrients is going to come into play. Getting enough protein, preventing catabolization of muscle, making sure that you're not experiencing chronic fatigue. That's all going to play into this. So let's dive into diet a little bit. What actions do you take, or what type of coaching do you give to make sure that everyone is receiving what they need?
Yeah. There's a common theme that I always operate off of to the best of my ability when I'm coaching patients. And diet's a great example of it, where I just can't stand giving people restrictive diets. I can't stand those programs where people are ordering food, where you got to buy the products, you got to buy these supplements, you got to buy your prepackaged food. And look, I get there's definitely some benefits to that, right? If you're super busy, you have the money, and some of those companies are very, very healthy, right? And so you could look at it from that perspective. But the problem, even with those ones, is where does the patient go from there, right? You're not going to be ordering foods from a freaking box for the rest of your life. And so what ability do you arm that person with to be able to go out into the real world and make choices on their own that are sustainable? That's my big problem. Same thing with this restrictive diet. Here's your 40 foods. Only eat those. Okay, great. You're probably going to get a shit ton healthier because you're removing all these triggers and various inflammatory foods. And how long are you going to do that for? 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? But there's going to be a Christmas that's going to be coming, and you're going to be at a party, and you're going to be looking at foods, and you're going to be having that conversation and dialogue with yourself. At some point, you are going to give in. And that's not me being pessimistic. That's just me being real. How many David Goggins exist? Okay, so so we gotta be practical. And so what I attempt to do, and what we do with our patients, is we teach them the fundamentals, but we make it so easy for them to adhere to, so that I don't have to give them a menu. I'll tell you right now. And before we get into it, I think I want to highlight one of the main reasons I believe my patients are able to have such a more comfortable approach towards food and still get amazing results is because we're having them fast for 36 to 48 hours per week. We cannot ignore. There's never been a program in this world that has patients fasting for 36 to 48 hours every single week. So we don't know what that's doing in terms of how much of a benefit in terms of weight loss, what it's causing. But I can tell you, just from the thousands of patients that we've been working with, my gosh, it just makes the diet part so much easier. I mean, the caloric deficit is massive among everything else. So number one, we got to reduce processed foods. And this isn't the first time you guys are hearing this. We know there's no one arguing about that. There's a debate about calories, hormones, yes, but processed food, everybody agrees, is bad for you, and we need to reduce it. But how much do we reduce it? That's where we get into it. And so for our patients, it's 90-10. I ask my patients, can you give me 90-10 during your weight loss program, knowing that there's going to be weeks where you slip up, knowing there's going to be weeks where you don't adhere to 90-10, but as long as you do your best to adhere to that 90% of your food being clean, 10% eat whatever you want, which includes alcohol. We could talk about that separately. And that's your commitment, knowing that the goal is when we get into your goal weight or get closer, we start slipping that to 80-20, 75-20, maybe even 70-30. Just kind of depends on the individual and what their body can tolerate, because there's always going to be individual genetic variabilities. But that's number one, is reduce processed foods. And then when you think about a diet that's low in processed foods, this is why I always recommend Paleo Mediterranean. But again, it's not because those diets necessarily are something magical. It's just they are, in essence, by definition, void of processed foods. So we can really call my dietary approach the anti-processed food diet. And that's what allows people, like, because we coach people all across the world. So there's probably so many foods that I don't even know about that are foreign, and the same rules apply. Did it come from processed sources, or is it unprocessed? Is this whole food? Then go for it.
Found in nature.
Found in nature. Did you get it from the perimeter of your grocery store? Did it come from a box or a wrapper or a processing plant, right? So I don't care what the food is, as long as it is 90% of it comes from unprocessed. Then the only other change to diet is I ask my patients for the first 2 to 4 months, depending on how progressed their insulin resistance and inflammatory conditions are, give me a keto approach. Give me 2 to 4 months where you are going low carb. So really, it's really easy to summarize. We're going to get you into the long fasting as quickly as we can. Usually on average, it takes patients 2 to 4 weeks to get there. We're going to go low carb, and we're going to reduce processed foods. That's it. No menu, no restriction, no nothing. Go out in the world and make your choices. And I just gave you the rule book. 3 rules. Like, how less overwhelming is. Now, here's the caveat. 5 to 10% of my patients are going to need something more restrictive. Absolutely. We got the extreme autoimmune cases. We got the extreme insulin resistant cases. But what's so awesome is I still let them all follow this kind of general protocol. And I don't make it harder unless their body presents the resistance that would tell me, okay, you're following everything right now, but you're not really losing weight, or you lost 5 pounds and it just stopped right away. Now let's take a deeper dive. Okay, you do have this autoimmune disease. You do have this going on. Now, okay, I'm sorry, Mrs. Jones. We're going to have to put you on an autoimmune diet. But even the patient at that point goes, I tried. You know what I mean? Like we tried to do level 1 intensity, if I can call it intensity levels. Now I'm more willing to try level 2 intensity. But why would I throw Mrs. Jones on level 2 intensity just because I assume that she has what is called leaky gut or she has Hashimoto's? There's such a broad range, even in the same autoimmune disease, person to person, that it doesn't make sense to just assume that she's going to need something so much more restrictive. And I can tell you, having done this protocol, people with autoimmune diseases can just follow the same protocol, and a lot of them get better. Some of them don't, and when they don't, we can modify it and make it more strict. And one more thing I'll say, it's not just the fasting that I think allows us to exercise a lower level of discipline necessary, but it's also the other things that we do, like the low dose naltrexone. That is massive too as well. And just kind of everything else after that. But I would say specifically as we're talking about autoimmune cases, LDN does make a world of a change to make it easier for a person like that to get in and achieve some great weight loss.
The number one emotion I met with after patients experience LDN is confusion. I'm not joking, because I just don't know how many times they've looked at me and said, how did my doctor never tell me about this? It's so cheap, it's so easy, it works so well, you know. But before that, what you said has to be parroted. Processed foods are terrible for you, and the human body was never designed. It's not engineered to be able to handle them. When you have a candy bar, when you have a French fry, chemically it sets off fireworks in your brain. You're not equipped for that, and not to mention, then you have the fact that your body can metabolize it and digest it so easily. Your caveman brain and body just say, whoa, hold on, screw everything else. Give me that stuff that's easy to digest. It makes me feel amazing. And guess what else it stops doing after time and time and time again of that easy to digest food? Oh, emulsifying fat, burning fat most of the time. Why do that when I can just keep signaling my body to get more of this awesome stuff? Do not eat processed food. Someone said the other day, if there was a rehab for sugar, I would go tomorrow. I believe that.
Yeah. No, I mean, and there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. I find myself communicating a little bit. If an individual can look at that and say, I don't feel any stress about eating 100% processed-free diet, by all means, go.
I'm not saying diet end all be all. I'm saying people who live on breakfast, lunch, and dinner is processed. The likelihood that you can come out of that on your own at a certain point is almost nil.
Yeah, right. It just, I mean, I just wanted, and I figured that's what you meant, but I just don't want anybody to ever feel like, okay, this is too unrealistic.
Right.
I try to be as sustainable, as practical as we can. I believe everything in what you said is true. But unfortunately, for most people, the access to food, it's only going to be a lot of processed.
So that's why I had Chick-fil-A on the way here, and it was delicious, right?
Right.
It's just the amount of food that we eat, and a lot of it just comes down to education. A lot of people just don't know what's bad for them and what's not, and that's what it really comes back to. Food found in nature. We're never going to go wrong there.
Yeah, make that the goal. Make that, it's like I tell patients, the goal is to get the majority of your protein from meat, from whole food, right? Not necessarily just meat, whole food, sorry, because you could do like a bean and a rice, for example, if you're past my low carb stage, but or legumes, things like that, but from whole food, right? But supplement when necessary, because the need for whole protein, or enough protein in your body, especially when you're losing weight, but protein is just essential for the rest of your life, outweighs the concern of having some of it come from processed food. So there's the convenience part of it, and there's the sustainability and practical part of it. But it's nice to know, and so I'm glad you brought that up, of like what the benchmark is, what the ideal is. Here's the range that's acceptable. If you can get here, great. But if you're here, that works too. Mm-hmm. And the patients can walk away with a win. They feel positive. This is one of my problems with social media. You can't freaking go through TikTok without seeing 10 conflicting things, 8 of which seem damn near impossible to do. Some guy without a shirt on the grocery store yelling at you because you're buying this product. It's just, we need a format to put it all together when we're thinking about the people out there, the people that are actually obese. What is I wonder how many of those people that make that content are actually thinking about the audience and how they're going to respond to that information and look at themselves and internalize, well, can I do this? Is that real? And I don't think most content creators are thinking that, unfortunately.
But when it comes to being realistic, the best thing I can tell everyone is celebrate small wins. If your goal is to lose 50 pounds and you lost 1 this week, great effort job. What did you do right? What led to that pound loss? Was it better sleep? Were you just a little bit more active? Did you park further away? Replicate that. But do not get down on yourself for a lack of positive movement, because that's still positive movement.
Absolutely.
And I think that we've done a really good job at really going beyond the numbers, so thank you. But I do want to cap it with this. With where you see yourself in the FLOA protocol and the impact that you want it to have, how do you see it aligning with preventative healthcare? How do you see it actually keeping people off drugs and away from surgeries and away from the morgue?
Yeah, I truthfully believe at my core that if we implement the FLOA protocol, even if we're not overweight, but that's a separate conversation. But if you implement the FLOA protocol and you really do it, right? You do the weekly fasting, which I'm going to say right now as a reminder, in case this is your first time watching this, it's way easier because of the medications, the peptides, the things that we give you. So just you got to pretend with me that the ability to get into that fast is way easier because of the stuff we're going to give you. So if you follow the protocol, the weekly long fasting, you reduce your processed food consumption, you implement a supplement protocol that we literally tell you what to take. So it's that simple. You start weightlifting, or you shift your exercise from cardio to weightlifting. You don't have to do both. In fact, most of my patients are working out 3 to 4 days a week and 30 to 45 minutes weightlifting. That's all they do. You don't have to do the cardio, which you might be like, are you kidding me? No, I'm not. And then you put some concern over your stress levels and your sleep. You optimize your stress, you optimize your sleep. And then inflammation's kind of this, it depends on how inflamed you are, but being cognizant, inflammation won't get better from a lot of those things, but then things like low dose naltrexone, if you are suffering with a particular autoimmune or inflammatory condition, if you do those things, not only are you going to lose weight, not only are you going to make the improvements to those underlying driving factors that drive obesity, which is why lasting weight loss after my program is so much better, but most importantly, you make massive improvements in your health overall. This is such a regular thing for us that we see Diabetics get better. Obese patients get better, meaning their medication usage is decreasing. We see people get off their statins. We see people get off their blood pressure. Blood pressure actually a lot more often. Usually the blood pressure is the first thing they get better with the fasting, which is always so fascinating. Overall, a massive reduction in the need for medications. And we don't wean people off medications. We always encourage them and mandate that they go to their primary cares, let them know what they're doing, get the permission to do this program, and then let them know that your goal is to wean off those medications despite what the doctors tell them or not, letting them know and working in cooperation with their physicians to wean off medications so that it's safe. But absolutely to my core, these are fundamental lifestyle choices that can achieve not just a lasting weight loss, but overall maximal improvement in health because of what fasting does and what these tenets do, which again, they go hand in hand. You lose weight, you're healthier. You get healthier, it's easier to lose weight. You lose weight, and you get healthier, it's easier to maintain that weight loss. So that's the goal in mind, and what I'm always constantly researching and upgrading. People that have been in my program for the last 2 years know I'm always adding, I'm always tweaking, and I even change things, which is why I'm so excited for that FLOA Lifestyle Group that I talked about earlier. Every single week, jump on a Zoom. The thousands of people that are there, whoever catches it, catches the recording. But here's your check-in with Dr. Jones. What's going good? What's going bad? What's frustrating? Get you guys back on track. Bam. I want to be there for those people for the rest of their lives. That's nothing to do with what you asked me, but I just kind of had that excitement there. But yeah, thanks for having me, John, and I can't wait for the next episode.
Me either, man. Thank you.
See you later.